you start to question your value. You start to question your self-worth.
Like, the more money you got, the more successful you are, and most people really do buy into that.
But really, I just needed a break.
What I love is helping people.
I'm Julie Balke, and welcome to The Evolved Career, a podcast where we help you determine what truly does matter most to you and how it can have a profound impact on your life. Today, our guest is Elizabeth Andrew, and we're going to learn all about Elizabeth. But where I really want to start with her, and what I think is so interesting about her story, is that, you know, that headline on LinkedIn where you get to say stuff about yourself, here's who I am. One of the things that she calls herself is a career reentry advocate. And as you might imagine, that is quite intriguing to me. And in our pre-call, I learned a bunch about what Elizabeth has learned about when we leave the workforce and we try to come back in. She also has a TED Talk that I'm going to have her mention as well, so you can go check that out. She is a technology sales leader, and we'll get to that also. But I want to start with Elizabeth. First of all, welcome.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for having me.
You have such a great story. And so tell me, how did you become interested in this whole field of re-entering the workforce?
Sure. So I actually had a very good career early on in my lifetime. I ended up taking 17 years off as a stay-at-home mom. In 2011, I had moved back to my home area, which is the San Francisco Bay Area, and decided to relaunch a career. I was able to launch a career in technology with no tech background after a 17-year career gap at almost age 50.
Wow.
And thank you. I have a career in technology sales, and that's really what I do. But on the side, I have an awful lot of people that reach out to me every day asking, how did you manage to get back? And so it's been something that I do outside of work as a volunteer to really help bring awareness to a lot of the issues and challenges that people face when they want to return to the workforce.
So is that mostly women then you work with?
Interestingly, I get a lot of men reaching out to me as well. There are a lot of women that have taken time off to raise their families. But I do get, I get people who've taken time off for a number of different reasons. And, sometimes it's 1 year, sometimes it's 20 years. And I do get quite a bit of men that have been reaching out.
Interesting.
As well.
So your story, I want to point out a lot of these little factors that really, in a lot of ways, you would think work against you. 50, technology, woman, out of the workforce for 17 years.
Right.
Wow. And you overcame all of those. So what, when you look at that moment in time when you said, I need to get back to work, I'm going to do something different. You were in financial services before, correct?
Correct.
So you said technology is where it's at. I'm going to go tackle that sucker. You've had a very successful career no matter what you've done. And so did you look at it as, I'm sure a lot of people said, are you crazy? Was it harder than you thought it was going to be? Or how did that go for you?
Absolutely. That was the hardest sale I've ever made in my entire life. And it did not happen overnight. It took a number of baby steps. In my very first job back, and I can give you a little bit of my background, but I started out in the investment industry. As I mentioned, from the San Francisco Bay Area. I was relocated to the East Coast in my early career as an institutional mutual fund wholesaler in the Northeast. I had a great trajectory there, but I ended up getting married to a New Yorker and moving down to the New York area and taking time off to raise my kids for those 17 years. I then moved back to the San Francisco Bay Area in 2011 and decided it was time to get back to work. It took a lot of steps to get back. I was really, Julie, candidly, completely unemployable.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get anybody to return my phone calls. I couldn't get, you submit applications. In this day and age, so much of the hiring is done through algorithms, and you apply into these black holes online, and they're not set up to optimize for people who have been out of the workforce.
Yeah, right. How long did it take you from when you said, I want to get into technology? How long did it take? What was that time frame you operated in?
So when I first got back, I had done a number of sort of consulting and contract jobs, really in anything that I could find. I finally found my very first job working for Putnam Investments for the West Region Director of Sales. I actually found that job on Craigslist, which baffles particularly recruiters, that it baffles their mind. But, it was a very much of a sales enablement entry-level role, but it was a perfect opportunity for me to get back into the city, into San Francisco, and engaged in really what I had done before. It was for a distribution mutual fund company. And I did that for about a year. It was a wonderful entree, but I just realized that financial services has changed so much over the last 17 years. I would have had to resit for all of my licenses. Yeah. And I just felt that it wasn't as exciting as it was when I got out of college and was launching my very first act. And here I am in San Francisco Bay Area with so much going on in technology and very exciting things happening. And I decided, as long as I'm completely reinventing myself, why not try tech?
Yeah, why not? What the heck?
Why not? Yeah.
And I'm sure you had more than one door slammed in your face.
A million. And it takes a lot of resilience and a lot of, you just cannot take it personally, and you have to just move on to the next opportunity, because ultimately in any role, it has to be a fit. And I definitely felt it was very, very interesting, because when I moved to the East Coast as a mutual fund wholesaler, I was working out of my house in my car. It was 100% outbound sales, calling on Merrill Lynch, Smith Barney, all the major investment companies, on stockbrokers primarily, also some enterprise organizations, but it was 99.9% white men that looked like my dad, particularly in the Northeast at that time. And so then flash forward 20 years later, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there are a lot of women, and it is a very diverse industry in technology, even though there's a lot of data behind, the lack of diversity in leadership and that sort of thing. But it is much more of a diverse community than the investment industry was many years ago. But I literally went from being the only woman in the room to the oldest person in the room.
Yeah. That's a shift, isn't it? A paradigm shift.
It is, and there were some interviews that I got and went in there, and the oldest person in the company was 30 years old, and I knew out of the gate that it wasn't going to be a fit for me.
So how did the market, and I'll just say that the collective, people who looked at your background or you networked with, or they were being polite and having coffee with you, how did the collective look at your 17 years experience as a mom?
It's interesting because there is data, and I believe I shared this with you when we spoke previously, but there is data that's put out from Lean In, which actually they get all of their research done through Stanford, that states if you have two candidates that are equally qualified, and one of them has PTA coordinator on their resume, they're 79% less likely to be recommended for hire than the candidate who is equally qualified. And I found that to be absolutely true.
Why do you think that is? What's your best guess on why that is?
I don't think that professional and corporate people recognize the value of work outside of a corporate lifestyle. I did a tremendous amount of nonprofit work in the 17 years that I was home. Many of the roles that I had in those years were equally as challenging as anything I've ever done professionally. I ran events for thousands of people. I raised money. I did fundraising and all different kinds of volunteer events in those years. And actually, many of those things were more challenging because you're working with volunteers. They can't
Yeah,
be fired.
right.
They may or may not do their job. And some of the committees that I worked on, there were a lot of people that were working on it. So it was managing people. And it's, even to this day, a lot of people don't recognize that work, even people that I've worked with.
So would you go so far if you had, let's say, someone that you were meeting for coffee and she was struggling with the same things you did and she was telling you about all the great things she did in the community while she was home those years as a mom? Do you go so far as to say, don't even put that on your resume?
So I don't tell people what to do. I just try to share my experience. And for me, it wasn't until I took all of that off of my
Wow.
resume that I had anybody taking me seriously.
Wow. That to me, when you told me that when we talked last week, I still can't get that out of my mind. It's just what a shame. So you would have been more attractive as a candidate with nothing for the last 17 years than to really talk about what you did, because those things are so discounted in the minds of most people.
Correct. And that there's data behind it.
Yeah.
That talks about that. And, I remember, so first of all, I have many friends who are in the recruitment industry and, but from my experience relaunching, that's a very, very difficult track to go down for people reentering because they're in sales, right? And they want to take a square peg and put it in a square hole, and somebody who's doing the job. And so that they have a hard time selling the career break. So I pretty much did not work with any recruiters at all as I was relaunching. I did, however, reach out through a friend of a friend to one recruiter. This was one of the most humbling situations that I was in. I met this recruiter for coffee, sort of out in the Danville area. I remember sitting down for coffee. He was doing me a favor. It was so nice of him just to sit down and talk to me and give me some advice. And yet we were in this conversation, and his company does some recruiting for Google. And I was asking about whether there are any opportunities there. And he literally laughed out loud at me.
You said, okay, I'll take that as a no. Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So
the internship, that movie.
Yes. Was it Robert De Niro or something? Was the 50 or 60-year-old intern, I think, somebody like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got traction, and then you've been able to parlay that into a successful career in technology.
Yes.
When you look back, what were those key moments, or those moments that you say, okay, that was a turning point? Those were the pivot points in my journey to reinvent myself.
So first of all, I try to get very resourceful. And, as I mentioned, I found my first role back to work through Craigslist. I've gone through a lot of platforms, AngelList, and things that are maybe not as big as an Indeed or a Monster. And my very first role, and it was interesting because in technology, in my lifetime, I had done inside sales, external sales, sales training and development, sales management. Of course, in the nonprofit, I did a lot of event planning and leading teams. I found my very first job in sales operations, which was really not my wheelhouse. And I know they hired me really because of my sales enablement abilities, but it was a great entry for me because I had to self-teach myself all of the tools, all of the technology, Salesforce, the stack of technology tools that you need to do your job today. And when you're reentering, a lot of the little things like calendar invites are challenging when you haven't been in Zoom meetings and things like that. So you have to get up to speed on that. And that's something I really try to coach people with. I tried to sign up for Excel refresher courses. And, I tried to take a lot of classes online so that I could, get myself. The biggest reason people do not want to hire career reentry candidates is they feel like they're out of date.
Yes.
And they're out of touch with the tools that it takes to do the job. But my argument is that you can teach those tools in 12 months or less. You can't teach 20 years of leadership experience in 12 months or less.
Right. So were there moments that you say, okay, I've got this? What was your first job in technology, true technology beyond the sales operations, where you really were carrying your own bag? I mean, what was your first role?
Sure. So the sales operations role that I got was great. It was a very smart team. It was in the healthcare technology space. I was the only person that didn't come from healthcare. Unfortunately, as happens with many startups, the company ran out of funding after I was there for about a year. And so I found myself back in a job search. The company went bankrupt. And so I was looking. I actually found an opportunity. I went on an interview through AngelList, so it was completely cold. And I found a company by the name of HelloSign. The VP of sales at the time, he really took a chance on me. I was looking to get into a sales role, an independent contributor role, but I had not sold anything in 20 years. I had never sold SaaS. And he recognized the breadth of experience. I think he also is a parent, so he can see that, it's good to have people that can wear a lot of hats. And he could see the success that I had early on in my career. And so he hired me onto a team of, it was a small and mighty team, mostly, as we say, stereotypical SaaS sales dudes. They're all great guys and good friends of mine. And I was one of the top producers from getting there. Month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, I was able to close the only 7-figure deals that we had at the company. And one of the things that I really loved when I joined the company, we were about 40 or 45 people. And it's a startup, it's early stage. We did have a fair amount of revenue, but Brian recognized the fact, the VP of sales recognized the fact that I am good at wearing a lot of hats. So it was so fun to be able to work on a lot of projects cross-functionally. In addition to selling, I was able to work with the product team and the marketing team and help train other salespeople and, entry-level sales development representatives. So it was exciting for me. It was a lot of fun. It was also a very, very technical sale. And this gives you an indication of how career reentry candidates can learn quickly. We were selling an e-signature API. So 50% of our customer base was technical, developers and engineers and CTOs, where the other half came from the business side. When Brian hired me into HelloSign, I didn't know what an API was. And so I was able to really spend a lot of time with the other salespeople that were there training and our API support engineering team, so that I was able to really pick up enough to be dangerous with the technology component of the product.
And then once you have some sort of track record of success, every time someone hires you from there on out, it's less risky to them because you've got that track record. It's just that big chasm of 17 years that people are like, did she change? Is she still going to be able to be as successful? Is she as hungry as she was when she was younger? And so getting to the other side of that chasm, you really just need one person to give you a chance. And then you have to grab on with both hands and really outwork everybody around you, because it's almost like the expectation's lower. Did you feel that at all?
That's right. It's still not as easy. It's much easier than coming in after 17 years off, but it's still not easy because people still do not recognize the fact that I have 10, 15 years of professional experience. They still see it as 3, 4, 5. I was at HelloSign for over four and a half years, and another tech company before that. And they still don't recognize the breadth of experience that I have leading teams and managing organizations and that sort of thing. But it definitely is much easier.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll have people reach out to me. It might be a parent who says, my son or daughter just got out of jail and they have a felony on their record and, they have to fill out these forms and, how are they ever going to get traction? And I would tell them the same thing that I'm sure you tell people. It's not going to be through a recruiter. It's not going to be through a job board where there's some sort of, you have to pass some screening software. It's going to be through somebody who meets you, who already knows you and believes good things about you and is going to give you that lifeline for you to grab onto. And once you grab onto that lifeline and you start to get some traction and build some history, it gets easier and easier. So it's the same, I think that in our lifetime and probably for a long time after that, people hire people. They don't hire attachments, word attachments. They don't hire, just people who pass the screening. They want to hire real human beings who they see promise in. And it's almost like when you're in that trying to reenter, you're using your background and your track record of success as part of your story, but then you really have to connect with somebody who sees something in you that they maybe someone gave them a chance. And so they want to give somebody else a chance. Or they, like you said, he recognized the value of having somebody who's a mom because he knows what a hard job that is. So it just takes one person to give you that. And it's 2/3 or more of people find their jobs through people they know or people they meet. And I would imagine for someone like you or a career reentry person, regardless of the reason that you've been out of the workforce, whether it's health related or you were in jail or, you had to take care of a parent or whatever it is, it's really that hook really is that human who looks at you and says, I want to give this person a chance.
Correct. In many ways. Although I will say it's really interesting. Might sound a little bit morbid, but I have a friend who had lost a brother many, many years ago. And when my father passed, we were talking about the funeral, and, it's always surprising who shows up and who doesn't equally. And I found that very much in my personal network. There were some people that, I really thought might have been able to help me out. And I was disappointed, not to have the support from people that I had hoped that might be in a position where they could have made some introductions for me and didn't. And then it was surprising to me who did step up. Yeah. Most of my career trajectory in this second chapter has been cold. I did have one friend of mine from the East Coast who is an investment banker, and her company's headquarters were based here in the Bay Area. And she knew I was looking, and this was before I really found a full-time job. It was that sort of contract consulting role. And they had somebody, and it was really an assistant role, which is, I'm not a good assistant, but I was willing, to do anything. And she had somebody that was leaving on maternity leave. And she said, would you be willing to fill in? I said, absolutely. And so I did. And that went well enough that they invited me or asked me to continue on trying to help them recruit for a specific role that they were looking to hire for. And so that really helped me get on my feet. But most of my other roles were, and I actually did have another consulting role that came through somebody I know as well that was really great. But most of the roles I found through AngelList or Craigslist or from really going out there and building from the ground up. I do, however, talk quite a bit about the importance of networking, and particularly here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but really in any city or any location, there's so many resources out there. And this is what I try to share with people. There are meetups, there are women leadership programs, there are, Chamber of Commerce organizations, and so many different ways to meet people. And when I knew I wanted to get into technology, I'm very much of a student of my own profession. And I started following a lot of thought leaders and taking, newsletters that were coming from different resources. And I saw an organization by the name of TechCrunch was hosting a meetup in the Presidio in San Francisco. And I signed up, I think it was $20. And I went completely by myself. Didn't know a single soul. I had a girlfriend I was going to try to bring with me, but she had to cancel. And I went. There were a lot of people sitting around in groups with their company and colleagues. And I wandered around, and I was actually in line for a food truck, and I met a gentleman who had just relocated to the Bay Area from India. He's a CEO of an early stage startup. We struck up a conversation, and we're still in our network. I ended up selling our HelloSign product to him several years after that. And you just never know, as you mentioned, how you're going to make a connection.
Yeah. So one of the things you said, you had people who could have helped you and didn't, and people who you were surprised. That is one of the absolute truths of job search. And we tell our clients this. We say, okay, we talk about making your A, B, and C list of your contacts. And I said, guaranteed, some of your A's will disappoint you and some of your C's will delight you. And it's just, it's nothing personal, but it's just one of those things that happens to almost everybody. And it's just, you just have to say, we find that the best networking contacts are your second level. So a contact of one of my A contacts introduces me to one of theirs. It's sometimes it's that next rung out of people that can tend to be more helpful. Something else you did that I think is really, really important is you said yes to a temporary assignment. And there are so many among us who'd be like, well, why would I do that? Like, no. You've got to put yourself in a position to strut your stuff a little bit, to show what you can do. Right. And it might be temporary. It might be contracted. That's what I tell, kids graduating from college right now who are saying, my gosh, there's no jobs. Well, get in a lifeboat. Do whatever you need to do because you don't know. Like you said, you met that guy in line at the food truck. Maybe you're working at Starbucks and you strike up a conversation with a friendly customer who happens to be in a position to hire. So their opportunities are not going to come knock on your parents' door while you're on the couch in the basement. You've got to be out among people. And when you're not feeling good about yourself, I mean, looking back on it, it took a lot for you, even as a confident extrovert. It took a lot for you to go to that event by yourself and feel like, you're the friendless among people who know each other, and you're just kind of wandering around. And that had to take a lot of courage.
Well, and half of them are my kids' age. But yes, and that's something that I really try to talk to people. I think that's one of the big mistakes that people re-entering the workforce run into. When I was doing volunteer work, I was living up in the Connecticut area outside of New York. So we were a suburb of New York. Most of the women that I was working with came out of really big careers in New York before getting married and having kids. A lot of these women could plan the Battle of Normandy. They were very, very talented, professional women. And so, one of the things that I run into oftentimes when I'm talking at something with career reentry candidates is people will say to me, and I've had this happen, where a woman said to me, I have an MBA from University of Chicago, Booth, and I was vice president of XYZ company, and so I'm not going to take less than a director level role. Well, that's a mistake.
Yes.
In fact, I literally had taken a job as an assistant, which is, again, it's not my wheelhouse, but I took that job. Well, within a matter of years, I had risen to the top, and she was still looking for a job.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, it's just like you said, I think it's really important for and college kids as well. And this is a really, really challenging time to be launching a brand new career with everything going on in the world. But it's very important. In fact, another friend of mine that actually it was a friend of mine that was looking for work. I said, why don't you look at TaskRabbit? Because we used to have TaskRabbit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with TaskRabbit. It's a app where, it's one of these gig economy apps where people can come and do all different types of projects. And in the tech company that I was working for at HelloSign, our HR team, or people team was bringing in TaskRabbits, maybe to help us assemble furniture or fold t-shirts or whatever little projects that needed to be done around the office. But it was great because then they meet everybody in the company. And, there were several of them that we became, they would come on a regular basis and we became really friendly with and felt like part of the team. And that can lead to a job.
Yes, absolutely. Being out among people, putting a smile on your face, and being genuinely interested in those around you really attracts good to you. So what are you doing now? How do you spend your time now?
Interestingly, you will laugh, but I'm actually right now I'm looking for a job.
Okay.
I had a great trajectory, a great run with HelloSign. I had been a top producing senior account executive there for a few years, and then I moved into a leadership role. I was a senior manager over our emerging business and mid-market business account executive teams. And in February of 2019, we were acquired by Dropbox for $230 million. So it was a really exciting run in a startup, starting, at a very early stage and going all the way through the acquisition. I stayed for a year after the acquisition, and at one point there was a lot of transition. This was last year, 2019. Throughout the year, we had 3 office moves, and when you go through an acquisition, certain people within the company start to peel off, and the VP of sales left at one point last year, and so I was kind of wearing a lot of hats again and reporting to the HelloSign COO, Whit Bauk, who came over from Box, and I did that until the fall, and then we started reporting up through Dropbox, and the person I was reporting to there was amazing as well. I just felt towards the end that, again, it comes down to that I'm a mom. I'm good at wearing a lot of hats. In every role I've been in, even in my early career, I've built from the ground up. I love growing, high growth, scaling. When I moved to the East Coast as a mutual fund wholesaler, it was our very first presence in the Northeast in a very crowded investment community. And so I took that region from 0 to 70 million. And so when you move into Dropbox, was an incredible company. I think if it had been my first job, I never would have worked anywhere else, but it's a publicly traded company. And you start to get really siloed in your teams, and I really miss the cross-functional. Outside of my job, in addition to doing a fair amount of speaking and supporting people and advising people on career reentry, I also have done some advising of early stage startups on go-to-market and growth strategies. And so I started advising a company last October, and so it was 4 people when I started advising them. I really felt they were very, very early stage, seed funded. But I fell in love with the technology in the company, and so I joined in mid-January of this year, of 2020. And of course, at that time, who knew the world was falling apart?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Now I'm a single mom with 3 college tuitions and looking to get on higher ground.
Well, and I have no doubt you will do it. In what situations do you feel like you're the best version of yourself?
You're talking about professional? Or Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really interesting. I really love tech because it's just evolving. It's the wild, wild west. It's actually the way the investment industry was when I was launching. It was much more interesting and exciting and changing. And we were part of Wells Fargo's very first mutual fund company, the Overland Express Funds, and really built that from 0 to $1 billion as a team. And one of the things that has been so much fun about technology is just the diversity here in the Bay Area. I have 3 college-age kids, and I have colleagues that are not too much older than they are. And I treat them with respect. I love working with, it's interesting because a lot of my friends and peers will say, oh, these kids are always on their phones and yada, yada, yada. And, I think they're brilliant. I think I think there's a lot of talent there. And I think that's another thing that I really try to talk to people about who are reentering the workforce, particularly after a long period of time, that are, my generation is Gen X. And I try to say it's the millennials and Gen Z they have the jobs now.
Right.
We need to adapt to them,
right.
Rather than this mentality of, they need to put down their phones and learn.
Yeah, every day the pendulum swings more in their direction.
Yes, and I love working with them. And but it's also, and this is one of the things where I knew HelloSign was a good fit because, again, the COO at Bauk was my age, and we had everything in between. We had people of all diversity of everything, which was wonderful. And we'd celebrate Diwali, and we'd have all different kinds of celebrations. And it was ultimately as a leader, you want the best person for the job, and that's really how we looked at it. I think there is a sense of, with particularly a sales team and having a lot of younger generations, I did have a little bit of a mother hen.
We can't help it.
Component. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So your TED Talk, where can we find your TED Talk? What's it called? How can we search for it and find it?
Sure. It's called Let Them Back In.
Let Them Back In. Love it.
Let Them Back In. And I will say, it was really interesting to do. I've done a lot of speaking and that sort of thing. Generally, people have 6 months to plan for a TED Talk. I'm not sure exactly what happened if somebody was asked to leave because they weren't prepared or somebody backed out. But I got a phone call a month before the TED Talk and said, would you like to do this? And it was right after the acquisition, actually, of HelloSign by Dropbox, and definitely not the best time, but I didn't want to say no to that opportunity.
Exactly.
So it was a lot to put together in a month. But it's essentially, when I was on the East Coast and I was still a stay-at-home mom in 2007, 2008, of course, it was the Great Recession when the financial markets and fell apart, particularly on the East Coast. It started with Goldman Sachs started a returnship program around that time where people could apply. A lot of women, but it could be men or women, could apply to these returnship programs. I believe it was a 3-month program where they get them up to speed on the tools. And it was great because then they could hire, the best of those candidates and place them in different companies. And it was so successful that a lot of the other investment financial services companies, Morgan Stanley and a lot of other firms, followed suit and built these returnship programs. When I moved out here in 2011, and I actually considered applying to one of those, but then we were relocating back out to California, which is where I'm from. And so I realized that there's nothing like that in technology. And again, it's because of the ageism, and, people aren't open to, or it certainly wasn't. It's becoming more so. In fact, I heard recently that, actually this was a couple of years ago, that Google may have hired somebody who's one of the initiators of the original Goldman Sachs returnship program. And I know Oracle has one. I have a call with somebody who's working on that returnship program or reentry programs at Oracle. And so it is becoming much more supported, and in the technology companies. But
wonderful.
It was,
yes, I'm so glad to hear that. So are you ready to play 2 questions, one shallow and one deep?
Sure.
Okay, here's the first one, the shallow one. What's one thing that you can't stand, but everybody else seems to love?
I'm not doing very well at these.
This can be anything. Food, a TV show, it doesn't matter. What's something everybody else loves it and you're like, you just don't get it?
Probably TV in general, for the most part. That's not a very good answer, though.
That's okay. No. I mean, you're just not a TV watcher, and you're right. I mean, people are constantly obsessing over, Game of Thrones or whatever it is, and you're checked out. It sounds like you have more things to do with your time that are at least more interesting to you.
Well, that's probably really not a good answer because I did get into Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we'll go on to the deep one. What breaks your heart?
What breaks my heart? What really breaks my heart is, and it's interesting because I've seen this in a number of different capacities, I think this is really relatable to my experience. And this is why I dedicate so much of my time to trying to help people and provide resources for people returning to the workforce. When things go wrong in the world, and most people, nobody gets to 50 unscathed, have felt something go wrong, there's a sense of your community pulling away from you. And it can be very different depending on what challenges people face. I think if people become ill, you might get your community really surrounding you. But there are certain things, as you mentioned, prison or, financial hardship or being unemployment, people pull away. And seeing that, having lived through that at a certain stage of my life, and then seeing people go through that, it really breaks my heart. And I think it's just really, that's why I try to be supportive and kind as much as I can to people that I know are feeling, hope. The ultimate answer to that is hopelessness. Yeah. What breaks my heart is hope, that feeling of hopelessness that people get.
We have more of our share of that today.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time. I this is my field, and I certainly learned some things, especially about, it's not necessarily to your advantage to play up the things you did when you weren't working, and I think that's sad. I hope that changes over time, because we are one person, and we bring ourselves to everything that we do, and I think our story is a combination of all of that, whether we are employed inside of a typical corporate setting or we're, working outside of that toward another goal. We're still showing up as the same person. And I think when somebody hires you, they get all of that. They don't get just the stuff from you 17 years ago. They get everything you did in those 17 years. And the fact that we don't value that is, I'll just say today, that breaks my heart.
Well, yes. And another point on that, too, is that I think it's really important. And this is something, so getting back to the TED Talk, and I know we're probably just about out of time here, but getting back to the TED Talk, it's really not targeting people returning to the workforce. The conversation is really towards companies, let them back in. And the point is that, and part of the reason I think I was able to be very successful in sales is I'm selling into CEOs. The average age of a Fortune 500 CEO is 58. And who is more likely to get a meeting, myself or my 22-year-old son?
Right.
Right. So there's a certain amount of credibility. And I think even if you're this really cool AI company or this very cool tech company, your customers are not going to all fit into that box. And I've sold into 100-year-old insurance companies out of Chicago, but I've also sold into really cool tech companies as well. But it's helpful for companies to have employees on all of their teams that reflect their customer base.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Well, I hope that's one thing that comes out, because the job market will come back differently. It'll still be hot at some point, but it will be differently hot. And I hope that companies are. One of the things they've learned in this is to expand their thinking, not only in terms of how they do business, but who they do business with and who they hire. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really enjoyed it, and I hope all of our listeners will go listen to your TED Talk. Let them back in.
Julie, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this as well.
If you enjoyed meeting the Evolved Careerist on today's episode, well, we've got a lot more lined up for you. Subscribe, tell your friends, rate us and write a review. And of course, follow us on social media. But if you're interested in learning more about how you can evolve your career, you can contact us through theevolvedcareer.com or thebaukegroup.com, and that's BAUKE. Do you know somebody who'd be a great guest, who has a great career story to tell? Or do you think you qualify? Then email me. My email address is in the podcast description. Until next time, here's to your career happiness.